My name is Lauren Calloway. I'm 29 years old, and I used to believe that being the responsible one in the family was something to be proud of. I used to think that showing up, covering the gaps, and never asking for anything back was the kind of quiet strength that people noticed eventually. I was wrong. This is not a story about being taken for granted. It is a story about what happens when you finally stop pretending you don't see what's happening, and what you do with the proof once you have it. It started on a Tuesday morning in October. My brother was getting married in April, and for the past 14 months I had been the one holding the financial architecture of that wedding together. The venue deposit of $4,000 had gone on my card. The catering contract, just under $8,000, was billed to my bank account because my brother said his credit score was still recovering from the car loan. The florist, the photographer, the rehearsal dinner at a restaurant downtown, all of it had my name, somewhere at the bottom of the paperwork. I had a spreadsheet. I always had a spreadsheet. That morning I opened it the same way I opened it every few weeks, just to remind myself of where things stood, and the total made me put my coffee down slowly. $19,412. That was what I had contributed to a wedding I was now being asked to attend as a regular guest. I had found out 3 days earlier, not from my brother, not from his fiancée, but from a message my cousin sent me late on a Saturday night. She typed carefully, the way she always did when she was nervous. She said she was sorry to be the one to tell me. She said she had been in the wedding party group chat, and there had been a conversation. She said my name had come up. She asked if I was okay. I told her I was fine, and asked her to send me the screenshots. She hesitated. Then she sent them. The messages were from a group called The Wedding Fam, and I was not in it. My brother's fiancée had written that she wanted the bridal party to feel cohesive, and she had concerns about the dynamic. She had written that Lauren tends to take over, and honestly, I just want the day to feel like mine. My brother had responded with a string of heart emojis, and then written, "I know, babe, we can just seat her with Aunt Deborah, it's fine." My mother had written that she agreed, and that it might be easier for everyone. My sister had sent a thumbs up. Then my brother's fiancée had written one more message that I read 3 times before I understood it fully. She said, "And she can still handle the payments through April, right? We're too far in to find someone else for that part." I set the phone on the kitchen counter. The coffee was still steaming. Outside my apartment in Nashville, the morning traffic was picking up, the sound of it rising and falling like something indifferent. I stood there for a long time. She can still handle the payments through April. I opened my email and pulled up the catering contract. My name at the top, my card on file, my signature on the bottom line. I opened the venue confirmation, same. I found the florist invoice and the photographer's retainer agreement, and the deposit receipt from the rehearsal dinner restaurant. The same name appeared on every single document, not my brother's, not his fiancée's. Mine. I closed the laptop and went for a walk. I did not cry. I had stopped crying over things I should have seen coming years ago. And the truth was that if I sat with myself honestly, I had seen this coming. I had seen it in the way my brother never once asked how I was managing. I had seen it in the way his fiancée smiled at me just long enough to hand me a price quote. I had seen it in the way my mother said Lauren will handle it the same way she said pass the salt, without weight, without gratitude, without the slightest awareness that those 4 words had been shaping my life for a decade. I walked for 40 minutes. When I came back, I made a second cup of coffee and sat down at the kitchen table with a notepad. At the top, I wrote the word leverage. Then I started making a list. The first thing I did was call my friend Dana, who had spent 3 years working in event contracts before she moved into corporate law. I did not want legal advice exactly. I just wanted to understand what I was holding. We talked for 20 minutes. She asked me careful questions. She confirmed what I already suspected. Every contract with my name on it meant I held primary authority over that account. If I chose to cancel or modify, the liability for any penalties would fall on the parties who had signed the vendor agreements as secondary beneficiaries, which in most cases was my brother. She also told me something I had not thought about. She said that if I had email documentation of being excluded from the event for which I was financially responsible, that was meaningful. She said keep everything. I already was. I spent that evening building a folder on my desktop. I put the screenshots from my cousin inside it. I put the contract documents inside it. I put every email confirmation, every bank statement, every receipt going back 14 months. I labeled the folder Wedding Full Record. When I closed the laptop that night, the folder sat on my screen like something patient, like something that had been waiting for me to finally pay attention. The following week, my mother called. She was cheerful in the way she became cheerful when she wanted something. Her voice a half step higher than usual, her sentences shorter. She asked if I had gotten the updated guest list. I said I had not. She said my brother and his fiancée had made a few changes to keep the headcount manageable and she was sure I understood. I said I did. She said great, and then she mentioned that the florist had reached out about a balance due by the end of the month. She said she knew I was on top of it. I told her I would look into it. I did not pay the florist. 3 days later, my brother texted me. His message was short. He said, "Hey, did you get the florist thing?" They emailed again. I wrote back and said I had seen it. He wrote, "Okay, cool. Let me know if you need the invoice." I did not respond. I was not ready yet. I wanted to be deliberate. I had watched enough of my own life get rewritten by people acting impulsively and then backtracking, and I refused to give my brother or his fiancée any room to reframe what I was about to do as an overreaction or a tantrum. What I was building was a record. What I was building was a case, even if the only court it would ever be heard in was the one inside my own chest. The week before Thanksgiving, my cousin called instead of texting. Her voice was different this time, quieter, and she said she had something else I needed to hear. She said there had been another conversation in the group chat. She said she recorded it this time on a voice memo because she thought I should actually hear it. She played it for me over the phone. It was my brother's voice and his fiancée's voice, and in the background I could hear my mother's laugh. They were talking about the vendor timeline, and my brother's fiancée said something about the photographer needing a second payment in March. My brother said Lauren's got it. Just forward her the invoice. His fiancée said, "Do you think she suspects anything?" And my brother laughed and said, "Suspects what? She's fine. She likes doing this stuff. She's always been like that." His fiancée said, "I just feel a little bad," and my mother's voice came in then, clear and assured. She said, "Don't. Lauren has always needed to feel needed. It's just how she is. You're doing her a favor, honestly." The recording ended. I sat on the edge of my couch and I pressed my palms against my knees, and I breathed slowly and deliberately the way you do when you are trying to stay ahead of something large. My mother's voice echoed in the room even after the phone went silent. Lauren has always needed to feel needed. It's just how she is. They had not even tried to hide it. They had said it out loud, in a room, with drinks in their hands probably, and nobody had flinched. There was no guilt. There was no lowered voice. Just casual certainty that I would keep paying and keep smiling and keep showing up to a wedding where I had been assigned a seat next to Aunt Deborah. I put the phone down. I did not cry. What I felt instead was a kind of cold settling, like a thermostat clicking off, like something that had been running constantly inside me finally going still. I saved the voice memo my cousin forwarded. I put it in the folder. I labeled it Family October Recording. The folder was getting heavy now, and I was almost ready. I made myself wait 2 more weeks. I am not naturally patient, but I had learned through years of watching other people act out of anger and then lose the high ground that timing is its own kind of power. I used those 2 weeks to make sure I understood every contract I had signed. I called the venue and asked a few questions as the primary account holder. I contacted the caterer and confirmed the cancellation policy and who held financial authority. I called Dana again and walked her through the full picture. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "You are in a very strong position," and she said it the way lawyers say things when they mean it. On a Monday evening in December, 6 days before the rehearsal dinner deposit was due, I sat at my kitchen table with the full folder open on my laptop. I had a notepad beside me. I worked methodically, the same way I had always worked, the same quality they had mistaken for neediness, the same steadiness they had mistaken for compliance. I contacted the venue first. I requested a formal review of the account as the primary holder and submitted a written notice that I would not be authorizing the final balance payment. I saved the confirmation email and put it in the folder. I contacted the caterer. The cancellation at this stage meant a partial forfeiture of the deposit, but the contract was clear that the remaining liability transferred to the secondary parties on the agreement, which was my brother's name and address. I saved that confirmation too. I called the florist and informed them that I was releasing the account and that all future invoices should be directed to the contract's secondary holder. The woman on the phone was professional and asked no questions. I thanked her. The photographer was the last call I made that night. She was kind and a little confused, but I walked her through the contract language and she confirmed she understood. When I hung up, I looked at the clock. It was 11:42. I had been working for 2.5 hours. My shoulders ached and my coffee had gone cold on the counter, but for the first time in 14 months, I did not feel the low hum of dread that had been living somewhere behind my sternum since I first put my card down for that venue. Deposit. I was not finished. I had 2 emails drafted and saved in my outbox. The first was to my brother's employer. My brother worked as a senior account manager at a mid-sized logistics company, and 3 years earlier he had gotten that job partly because I had introduced him to my manager at a networking event. The email was factual. It contained the voice memo. It contained a summary of the financial arrangement and the recordings in which my brother discussed managing me without my knowledge. I did not accuse him of anything illegal. I only provided documentation of his character and judgment. I did not send it that night. I saved it. The second email was to my brother's fiancée's mother, a woman I had met twice, and who I knew from a brief conversation had no idea her daughter's wedding was being funded by a sister-in-law who had been quietly reassigned to a back table. I did not send that one either. Not yet. I went to bed. I slept better than I had in months. The first message came 2 days later. My brother texted me on a Wednesday afternoon, and his tone was still casual, still assuming. He said, "Hey, the venue just sent me a weird email about the account. Do you know what's going on?" I read the message and set my phone face down on my desk and finished the report I was working on. 40 minutes later, I picked it up again. I wrote back and said yes, I removed myself from the account. I sent it. I watched the 3 dots appear and disappear 3 times before he wrote back. The message said, "What does that mean?" I wrote back and said it means the payment will need to come from you. Then I put the phone in my desk drawer. The calls started that evening. My brother first. I let it ring. My mother second. I let it ring. His fiancée called from a number I did not have saved, and I only knew it was her because she texted immediately after and said, "Lauren, please pick up, this is Elena." I did not pick up. The texts came in waves over the next 2 days. My brother started measured and ended frantic. My mother started disappointed and ended accusatory. Elena's messages were the most revealing. In the span of 48 hours, she moved from confusion to anger to something that read almost like panic. She wrote, "We have contracts in place. You can't just do this." She wrote, "Do you know how much we've already planned around these numbers?" She wrote, "This is so selfish. I thought you wanted to be part of this." That last one made me stop. I thought you wanted to be part of this. I took a screenshot of every message. I put them in the folder. I labeled the subfolder Aftermath December. On the 3rd day, my mother called 8 times. On the 8th call, I answered. I did not say hello. I waited. There was a long pause, and then her voice came through, tighter than usual, stripped of the cheerful half-step. She said, "Lauren, this has gone far enough. What are you trying to prove?" I said, "I am not trying to prove anything. I said every contract I signed was in my name. I said I have documentation of a conversation in which you discussed managing my involvement for your convenience. I said I removed myself from financial obligations I was never asked to take on in the first place. I said I did nothing unlawful." I said that part slowly. There was silence. Then she said, "You're being dramatic." Then she said, "Your brother is devastated." Then she said, "I did not raise you to behave this way." I said, "I know." And then I said something I had been rehearsing for 3 days without meaning to. I said, "You raised me to handle things without asking for anything back, and I did that for 14 months. And the only thing I got from it was a seat next to Aunt Deborah and a voice recording of you explaining why that was actually good for me." She didn't speak for a long moment. When she did, her voice had changed. It was smaller. She said, "Where did you hear that?" I said, "I'll talk to you when you're ready to have an honest conversation." I ended the call. My hands were shaking slightly when I set the phone down. Not from fear, but from the weight of having finally said the words I had been swallowing for years. The apartment was quiet around me. Outside, the December sky was low and gray, and the street below was full of people moving in their coats, heads down, going somewhere. I stood at the window for a while just watching them. That evening I sent the first email. Not the one to my brother's employer, the one to Elena's mother. I kept it brief. I attached the relevant contracts, the voice memo, and a short summary of the timeline. I did not editorialize. I told her that I believed she deserved to understand the financial foundation her daughter's wedding had been built on, and that I had made the decision to step back from that role. I wished her family well. I hit send and then I closed the laptop. The next morning, Elena's mother called my brother. I know this because my cousin texted me at 9:15 and said the whole thing just blew up. Elena's mom is on the phone with your mom right now. I wrote back okay and went to make coffee. By noon, the texts from my brother had changed character entirely. Gone was the casual confusion. Gone was the deflection. What replaced it was something rawer and more telling. He wrote, "You had no right to involve her family." He wrote, "Do you know what you've done to Elena?" He wrote, "Mom is saying you've lost your mind, but I know what this is. You've always been jealous." I did not respond to any of them. I put my phone on silent. I went to work. 2 days later, Dana called me. Her voice was calm and precise. She said she had received a message from a lawyer representing my brother and his fiancée. She said they were claiming I had breached an informal financial agreement and caused damages. She asked me to walk her through the full picture one more time. I sent her the folder. Every document, every contract, every receipt, the voice memo, the screenshots, the email chain. She called me back 90 minutes later. She said, "Lauren, every account was in your name. Every contract lists you as primary holder. You had full legal authority to cancel or modify any of it at any time. There is no breach because there was no formal agreement obligating you to continue payment." She said, "Even if they find an attorney willing to file something, it won't survive a motion to dismiss," she said, "and frankly, that recording is the kind of thing that tends to discourage people from pursuing litigation." I asked her if I needed to do anything. She said no. She said, "Just keep the documentation organized and don't respond to their lawyer directly." She said, "You're protected." I sat with that word for a moment. Protected. It felt strange in the context of my own family. The idea that I had needed to build a legal case to feel safe from people I had spent my adult life quietly carrying. I thanked Dana. We stayed on the phone a few extra minutes just talking, the way we used to before everything got complicated. When we hung up, I felt something I had not expected, which was not triumph, not satisfaction exactly, but something cleaner, something that felt like ground under my feet after years of treading water. My brother's wedding did not happen in April. I found out from my cousin in March that the venue had released the date after the secondary holder failed to make the final balance payment on time. The catering contract had been renegotiated at a significantly higher penalty rate, which my brother and Elena were responsible for. The rehearsal dinner restaurant had issued a collections notice. I learned most of this secondhand and I did not enjoy hearing it. I want to be honest about that. There was no satisfaction in the specific details of their scrambling. What I felt instead was something quieter, a kind of confirmation that the architecture I had been maintaining was real, that it had been load-bearing, that the people who dismissed me as someone who just needed to feel needed had never actually looked at what I was holding up. My mother did not speak to me for 6 weeks. The silence was easier than I expected. In its absence, I started to notice what I had been filling up with the noise of managing her approval. I started sleeping more. I started spending Sundays the way I wanted to spend them instead of the way I thought I should. I called my grandmother more often, and those conversations were the best parts of my week. In late February, my mother sent me a text. It said, "I've been thinking." It said, "I know things were not handled fairly." It said, "I'd like to talk if you're open to it." I read it twice. Then I put my phone down and went about my morning. I was not ready to reply yet, but I was not angry either. I was just somewhere new, somewhere quieter and more mine, and I was in no particular hurry to invite noise back in. I did reply eventually, 2 days later, and I kept it short. I said I'm open to a conversation, but I need it to be honest, not careful. I said I won't pretend the last year didn't happen, and I won't accept a version of our relationship where my value is measured by what I pay for. I said, when you're ready for that, I'm here. She wrote back the next morning. She said okay. That was not a resolution. I want to be clear about that. A single word is not an apology, and a conversation is not a repair, and I had spent enough of my life being managed by people who were skilled at making me feel like things were better than they were, but it was a start. And this time I was not going to carry it. She was going to have to walk toward me for once. The Friday before my 30th birthday, I booked a trip to Portugal. Solo. 10 days. A small apartment in Lisbon. No itinerary except a list of restaurants I wanted to try and a few coastal towns I had read about. I had been saving money for 3 years under the vague idea that someday I would do something like this, and then I had spent the past 14 months funneling that same money into a wedding that tried to seat me next to Aunt Deborah. When I pressed confirm on the booking, I felt something I can only describe as physical. A loosening. Like something that had been tightly coiled in my chest, finally releasing its grip. I kept the folder on my desktop for another month. Then one evening I looked at it and realized I had not opened it in weeks. I moved it to an archive drive. Not deleted. Just filed. It was not a weapon anymore. It never really had been. Not to me, anyway. It was a record. Proof that I had not imagined what I was carrying. That the weight was real. That my name had been on every line and my contribution had been real, and the people who reduced me to a convenient function had been wrong about me in every way that mattered. I poured myself a glass of wine. I opened my laptop to a new folder and started a list of everything I wanted to do before I turned 30. It was a long list. It had nothing to do with anyone else's needs. I worked on it for 2 hours, and when I finally closed the computer, the room was dim and quiet and warm and entirely mine. If you have ever been the one who handled things, the one who showed up without being asked, the one whose name appeared at the bottom of every document, while everyone else's name appeared on the invitation, I hope you hear this. The strength that made you reliable is not the same thing as obligation. What you carry for people who won't even look at the weight is not love. It is infrastructure. And infrastructure can be withdrawn, not as revenge, not out of rage, but because you are a person, not a payment system. And the moment you stop funding the comfort of people who consider your generosity a personality flaw, is the moment you find out exactly how much you were actually worth to them. They called me selfish. They called me dramatic. My brother said I had always been jealous. My mother said I needed to feel needed. What I actually needed was to stop. And when I did, for the first time in years, I could hear the quiet of my own life, steady and undisturbed, waiting for me to finally move into it. If this story resonated with you, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been the person who held something up while everyone else forgot to say thank you? Tell me in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from. And if you don't want to miss the next one, make sure you're subscribed, because there are more stories coming, and every one of them is true in the way that matters most.